Okay, welcome. Dragon's Cure. We're going to start with Chapter 2. I Hate Him. Serena worked her way through the fog that surrounded her head. A groan escaped her lips. Her legs hurt. Her arms ached. Her ribs screamed at her. Come to think of it, every single part of her body hurt. She stretched and yearned to shield her ears from the noise. Belatedly, she realized it was her own voice screaming. She shut her mouth. Her eyes didn't seem to hurt as badly as the rest of her. She opened them to find herself on the floor of the cooking area, right where she had fallen. No, where he had left her. Unfortunately, the memory started to return. Her father had come home early last night in one of his angry moods. How was she to know he would be home early? He had expected her to have his meal ready when he walked in the door. The words came then. Those didn't hurt. Well, not as much. She could at least block them out. Try as she might, some of them still seeped through. Nasty words about her mother, who she barely remembered. Her mother, who had died to escape the pain her father had inflicted on them both. The final blow came when she set the meal in front of him. It was not up to his standards. He threw it on the floor as he yelled at her, something about it being unfit for a man to eat. "If you were a man," she screamed back, "then you would have a job and bring home decent food to serve." She didn't know how it had happened. One moment he was sitting at the table, and the next her face was looking at the opposite wall, the sound of the slap ringing in her ears. He probably would have stopped there, but something had snapped inside of her. When she spoke, her voice was cold and quiet. A decent man would not strike a woman. She saw this punch heading for her midsection, but there was nothing she could do to stop it. As she doubled over, trying to get a breath of air, another blow hit her nose. She didn't doubt it was broken. At some point, she had passed out. She ground her teeth together, trying to not scream as she moved her leg. Saying it hurt was an understatement. She looked down and found the explanation. The only usable chair was now unusable. It lay broken in pieces on the floor, its leg abandoned beside her. She decided to use what had been a weapon as a crutch. Slowly she pushed herself up to a sitting position, and then to her knees, and finally up to the stove. The stove was cold now. There wasn't enough wood to make a decent fire, let alone cook anything. She leaned against it, panting. The pain in her ribs reminded her to take shallow breaths. Looking around the room, she realized there was nothing left for her here. She would leave. She could find a place in the woods south of Bosque. She could live out there. Might be cold, reason told her, but she answered it. Not any different than here. Walking carefully, she moved to her room and gathered a few belongings. A blanket worked as a pack. Placing a couple changes of clothes inside it and a hairbrush, she set it over her shoulder and headed out. Walking out the door of the abode she had called home for the 18 winters of her life, she didn't look back. She wasn't leaving much behind. She didn't breathe easily until she was out of Bosque. She had been afraid someone would find her and stop her, or worse, tell her father. Yet nothing happened. She was free. If her leg weren't so sore, she would have danced with joy. Instead, she just stared up into the blue sky and thanked fortune she was alive and not dead like her mother. The thought of her mother didn't bring tears to her eyes. Instead, it brought with it hatred for her father. Her mother was dead because of him. If Serena had stayed, she too would be dead. "I hate him," she said quietly, then more loudly. "I hate him! I hate him! I hate him! Never again will I let anyone hurt me like that. Never!" With her vow, a calm came over her. She walked south, wondering where she would find a place to stay. The thought of the river came to her. Maybe it would be better than the forest. There might be caves there to protect her from the rain that would come with the summer storms. The caverns would also protect her from the lightning. She headed that way. Serena had never been to the caves, but she knew most people stayed away from them. Some said strange creatures protected them. She didn't believe those stories, which seemed designed to scare children from wandering in the area and getting lost. The caves were larger than Serena had expected, and she found that they meandered all along the riverbank. At first she stayed close to the outside edge. Since she didn't have many things with which to furnish her home, it didn't take much to set up house in a small cave. She found a stump to use as a chair, a larger hollowed stump for a table, a nice rock for a candle holder, and another rock that worked as a ledge for her hairbrush. Over the next few days, she created a comfortable home. Her resolve to stay in the cavern almost gave out after the first 2 days, when she had no food and no way of starting a fire. She almost returned to the abode she had known all her life, if only to get her father's flint and steel. Fortune shone upon her, though. She had started back to Bosque when, beside the river, she found a fire had been built the night before. Some wanderer had used the spot for the night. Her fear of being discovered was driven away by the sight of a still smoldering stick. Picking it up gingerly, she shielded it from the breeze and took it back to her home, where she laid it in the fire pit she had constructed. That had been the turning point. From then on, she had scavenged for food near the river and never looked toward Bosque. She was accustomed to going without food, so here, where she could find something to eat at least once a day, she grew stronger.